Hello, and welcome to another edition of the Town Tea with Sarah and Katie. My name is Katie Hodgson with the Association of Towns, and with me and leading the charge or spilling the tea today is our Deputy Director and Legislative Director, Sarah Brancatella, here to tell you all about even year elections.
I'm only smirking because right before Katie hit record, she was like, "Don't laugh." And now I'm like, it just triggers
How
laughter.
can we not laugh?
Yeah,
And you have your tea slash
I
coffee.
do. I do have my tea. Yeah. So Katie, why don't you ask me some questions about even year elections?
Okay, so can you tell me a little bit about the history of the even year election saga? Because as far as I know, the state enacted this even year election law, and then it was found to be unconstitutional. So those officials that were running this year were running for a normal term, right?
Yeah. Okay. So great first question, Katie. The even year election law was it was the year 2023. It was November 20, not November, December 21st or something like that. It was the end of December 2023 when Governor Hochul signed the even year election law into law. And it does exactly what we're saying that it does. It transitions local elections for most town officials, as well as most county officials, from odd years to even years. There's some wonkery in terms of term length, but I think we'll get into that. A bunch of different municipalities sued, challenging this law on a couple of different bases, saying that it was unconstitutional, it violated municipal home rule law, and there were a couple of other legal arguments. This took place in a trial court in Onondaga County, Onondaga Supreme Court. And they found that they agreed with the municipal plaintiffs, saying that, yes, this wasn't unconstitutional. You could no longer, it wasn't enforceable. It didn't apply. And so what's called a stay was put on the law, which basically is just like a pause saying, hey, no, this is not enforceable. You can't operate under it. The state appealed this decision. I'm not going to get super into the weeds on some of the procedural dorkiness that occurred,
You
but
want to say the Latin term? I know you do.
yeah.
Oh,
So
that's no, I'm getting
originally,
ahead of you. Sorry.
yeah, yeah. No, I wasn't going to, but yeah, I do want to. So it went to the Court of Appeals, and then sua sponte,
Here we are.
they were like, yeah, no, actually, we're not going to hear this because usually what happens is there's an intermediate level appellate court in New York State, which makes New York unusual, actually, in that regard. So the Court of Appeals is the highest court, and then you've got your departments, the first department, second department, third department, and fourth department, and then the trial courts. I know that Katie and I know the third department very well because we both clerked there as appellate clerks. But so what happened, because this case involved some constitutional issues and some election issues, the state was like, hey, we're just going to bypass the intermediary appellate court and go straight to the Court of Appeals. The Court of Appeals, sua sponte, was like, yeah, no, not thanks. This doesn't actually involve a constitutional issue. This involves an issue of statutory interpretation, et cetera. So then they bumped it over to the fourth department, the intermediate level appellate court. The fourth department expedited the appeal because this happened, and I'm getting like so excited about this. So in March of 2025 is when the Court of Appeals was like, yeah, no, we're not going to hear it. We're going to kick it over to the fourth department. The fourth department expedited everything. And then just a few weeks ago, they issued a determination, a decision saying that, hey, actually, we do think that the even year election law is constitutional and it should absolutely be applied to the November 2025 elections. Then what happened, like less than a week later, is the Court of Appeals was like, yeah, no, we'll hear it. Yeah, we're good. So now oral argument is scheduled for September 8th, 2025. There is a whole briefing schedule set out on the Court of Appeals website. And I anticipate that they will have a decision issued before the November election. However, I'm sorry, I'm being like so long-winded about this.
No, you're actually being very concise, I think.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. However, even if they don't issue an opinion before November 2025, we have to act as though the law is constitutional and in place because that is the last decision from the highest court that is in place. So we apply the law that is in place at the time, right? So even if the Court of Appeals doesn't issue a determination before the November elections, the Fourth Department said that it was constitutional and it applies. So that's how we have to proceed.
So a couple of members have indicated, well, listen, I'm circulating nominating petitions right now or even last month, so April, May, and it's nominating me for a 2-year term or a 4-year term. So how can I get nominated for that and then serve a shortened term by a year? And the appellate division decision addressed that, right?
Yeah, and the appellate decision basically said, yeah, okay, all right, sure, but you're going to serve a shortened term. I know your petition says X,
Mhm.
but like the law says YZ, so we're going to apply YZ. So essentially, what happens under the even year election law is that if you are running for a 2-year term in 2025, it gets shortened by 1 year so that you are serving a temporary 1-year term. If you're elected in 2025, then you have to be reelected. If you decide to run for reelection, the position, I think a better way of putting it is the position is up for election again in 2026. If you serve a 4-year term of office and you are running for election in 2025, then that gets shortened by 1 year as well. And the position would be up for reelection again in 2028.
For a normal 4-year term, because then it will be synced
Yes.
up, assuming that the Court of Appeals affirms the Fourth Department's decision, which I don't want to get into speculation or betting, but I'm inclined to believe that they're going to agree with the Fourth Department.
I think that that is a realistic outlook. Yeah. And that's not making a commentary on whether that's the decision that should be made.
Right.
But, I
Oh, of
think,
course.
yeah,
We support home rule. I believe you're writing an amicus
yeah,
in support of the municipal plaintiffs' positions about how towns should retain odd-year elections because
yep.
there's
Assuming that the court accepts it, I just want to be clear to our members that it is at the court's discretion to accept amici briefs.
do that.
Yeah.
Excellent point. That was a nice use of the plural and bases as well. Notice that
Yeah.
stuff.
Just nailing those plurals today. Um, Actually, Katie, I know that you and I have talked about this, so I'm going to ask you a question.
Right.
What do you think about the application to vacancies? So let's say that somebody ran in 2023 for a 4-year term and somebody resigned midterm. So now that position is up for election in 2025. Before the even year election law and like before it was determined constitutional again, it would seem like, okay, you're just running for another 2 years, right? You're filling out the term. But do you have any? I know that this has come up and we've talked about it. But if you're running to fill a vacancy and you like for a 2-year term of office, what are your thoughts? I mean, I know what
So
they are.
initially, I thought, well, hey, like you're saying, the term was up for reelection 2027. You're just filling a vacancy, so it would run through. You would run again in 27. But, however, you pointed out, I think it was section 4 in the law. Is it 4 or 5, where it says you're going to treat if there is something that triggers an election or like a vacancy, then you're going to shorten that by 1 year, essentially. So if you are running to fill a vacancy on a term that normally would not be for election until 2027, you're going to be running again next year. You're only running for 1 year, serving a 1-year term as opposed to a 2-year term filling that vacancy.
Yeah, and I know that, that's
Crazy.
something that we obviously talked about, and I had to go back in the law, and I was just happened to be reading the even year election law for fun,
As one
and I was like,
does.
yeah, and I was like, wait a second.
Good
Wait,
times.
this does apply to vacancies. So
They
yeah.
thought of everything.
Oh yeah, yeah. I think the other thing that I wanted to bring up for our members is that a lot of times I get questions about why doesn't this apply to every position?
Oh, right, right. Good call.
There's a there's an answer for that. So, for example, the current even year election law doesn't apply to town justices. And that's because under the New York State Constitution, there are certain protections or certain language in there that basically say that justices shall be elected in odd years. I don't think it says that verbatim, but that's in essence what it says. That also, that same protection, that same constitutional protection is applicable to a smattering of county positions. Um, so even though this, even your election law applies to counties and towns, there are some exemptions from it. Additionally, cities are constitutionally protected and for odd year elections. I do want to let our members know that there is legislation that is currently being discussed and potentially going through the legislature that would call for a constitutional amendment, thus making town justices, those county positions, as well as city elections on even years. So it's the same thing, right? But because it requires a constitutional amendment, it has to be adopted by the state legislature 2 consecutive years. And then also it would go to a public referendum on the November ballot at a general election. So because it requires constitutional amendments, it requires a lot more hurdles to overcome. That's one of the reasons why the legislature started with towns and these county positions because it was the lowest hanging fruit. Like it was the easiest to change. It
Simple
did,
state law, right? Versus a two
yeah,
process plus public vote.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So that's that's where we are
See
with
where
that.
we're going, right?
Yeah, yeah,
So I guess we'll have to revisit this recording after the Court of Appeals decision.
yeah. I kind of don't want to watch this recording now because I was so excited in my retelling
No,
of
I would not say excited. I would say enthusiastic about the law and letting our members know, which is important because we got to stay awake, right?
yeah. I like procedural stuff, and this law and like this course of litigation just has some really interesting procedural twists and turns, which somebody like me geeks out
Well, I mean,
on.
we all have things we get wonky about, right? So
Yeah.
we say you're wonk in this regard in a good way.
I mean, I've seen you get very excited about taxes.
Exactly. And like, what's exciting about that? So we all have our things.
Yeah. Yeah.
Did
What
you have anything else you wanted to say before we wrap up this recording?
other than I've also seen you get very excited about Orioles. And it's funny, the same day that we had that conversation, my mom randomly was like, "Oh, honey, I saw an Oriole in my bird feeder." And
That's me. So, long story short, I've been trying to attract an Oriole to my yard for about 5 years now, and one finally came this year, and then I got a souped up Oriole feeder. So now there's a space for two oranges and lots of jelly, and he came to that one yesterday. So exciting times in my at my house, in my yard.
your oranges bring all the Orioles to the yard.
They do. I want more to come. But
Yeah.
anyway, we digress. Yeah. So good
Yeah.
to
We have an FAQ on the even year election law on our legislative resource hub on our website, nytowns.org. So I understand that it can be difficult. We all learn in different ways. So if you want to go back and read this and see it in writing, there's also a chart that explains if you run for election this year, when would that position be up for election again? So yeah, and that's you might have even come to this recording from that sheet.
shout out to that chart. Looks
Thank
dope.
you.
Love it.
Yeah,
Excellent FAQ.
yeah.
And shout out to Sarah and Libby and staff for developing the Legislative Resource Hub. That's a relatively new addition to our website, and it's fantastic.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Sarah, for that. And I believe that is the tea we are serving today. We will be back soon with some other hot topic for you to ingest.
Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah, thanks.
Bye.